from the Signature Bank Studios.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We were talking about Nora a little bit earlier. Conclave was the favorite going in, I think, for Best Picture last night. Not that these awards mean anything, but since Conclave may be of interest to some of our listeners who have not yet seen it, Ralph Fiennes is always good. Mm-hmm. He was good in this, but there's only so much you can do with a script this banal. The definitive review, and I read a bunch of them, and then I saw the movie. The definitive review, as far as I'm concerned, was Dan Hitchens' review of Conclave over at First Things. Just a couple of riffs. The anti-Catholic stuff is actively offensive, but in a fairly vanilla way by today's standards. I agree with that. The plot is predictable-ish. The big twist, idiotic, but relatively well-constructed. The mirroring of current Vatican politics, noticeable but lacking in insight. You can sit back and let it wash over you. Sure, you won't miss anything important if your attention wanders. Yeah. I mean, the premise is the Pope dies, and then the College of Cardinals is convened to select the new Pope, and then the palace intrigue begins, blah, blah, blah. The theology, he writes, is, of course, grim stuff. And the key here is certainty. Certainty is the one sin that you shall not commit. In fact, that's what the Ralph Fiennes character announces. Okay. And of course, Hitchens picks up on this well. Talking about certainty and the fact that you can be certain of nothing. He has a good riff in this review. As John Henry Newman observed, to have faith is to believe something because God has said it. And while you should maintain a certain skepticism towards the pronouncement of, say, the Washington Post, it is wholly reasonable to have certainty about what God has revealed. To quote a great philosopher, translated by a great poet, truth himself speaks truly, or there's nothing true. Yes. As for certainty being the enemy of mystery, which is the argument that's advanced in Conclave, well, such mathematical truths as Euler's identity or Euclid's theorem are as certain as anything, but also deeply mysterious. And in general, mysterious things have an element of certainty to them, an element of structure and even predictability. The changing of the seasons, the rings of a tree, a wedding ceremony, a cello concerto, etc. So anyway, I'll post Hitchens' review since everybody's talking about the Best Pictures now, and this is the time when Best Pictures get watched. Best Picture nominees get watched. Don't have too high of expectations about Conclave. Okay. Turning our attention to Doge, because the displaced federal workers are descending on the Senate to demand senators to do something about their displacement. And it all comes sort of the variety of some of these federal workers who you may have heard from, like Elizabeth Glidden, formerly of USAID.
I really felt that we were providing support and care to humanity around the world because it's the right thing to do. And that made me feel proud no matter who was president. And now I don't know what to do. Okay. And I have cried every day. I think that that's normal. I have a 15-month-old at home, and I'm looking at him and thinking, well, what's this country that we're now living in?
I know. Is it really America if USAID stops to exist in the form it previously existed? It's a great question. Marley Bird, who is a USAID contractor, agrees.
All of our networks have been dismantled. You know, there's no jobs for us here in D.C. I don't know if there are jobs for us, period. A lot of people's professional lives have been completely ruined. And I want to know how the senators are going to support us. How are they going to give us resources? How are they going to make sure that people's families are taken care of? We're just witnessing the entire industry is going down. And what are the senators going to do about it?
Now, did these people walk the red carpet last night before the Oscars because they're chasing them around like they're movie stars?
What is the USAID sector? Professional lives have been ruined. Well, I mean, you could go work for like the MacArthur Foundation and do the same thing USAID is doing, or a lot of the big foundations.
And there are other jobs in D.C.
But it just continues. Karlan Jankowski is also a USAID. The USAID folks tend to be the most outspoken, but not the only.
To be honest, our entire industry is imploding because they are
What is your
demolishing
industry?
USAID in the wood chipper. A lot of the work that we did at USAID promotes soft power, promotes our image around the world for America. And if you don't invest in this, then you will pay a lot more in defense, and it puts everybody at risk.
Yeah, she's reading off that throw pillow that she got with her welcome package at USAID. Soft power, promotes America's image, pay now or pay later. We'll take our chances paying later. For more on this and other matters, John Hinderaker, president of the Center of the American Experiment and contributor to PowerlineBlog.com. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you, Dan.
What sort of career advice do you have for those displaced from the USAID industry?
Well, get a job. But, you know, Dan, the people losing their jobs, it's not just in America. So on Powerline, I wrote about a story in the London Times. The biggest LGBTQ organization in England announced it had 144 employees, I think was the number. And it announced that it was laying off one half of its workforce because of this upheaval at USAID. And so apparently we taxpayers have been, we and the article says that the biggest contributor to the budget of this big LGBTQ organization in London was the American taxpayers.
So the identitarian advocacy for the LGBTQIA2S++ industry has also taken a hit then, the industry.
Yeah, apparently this is what they mean when they talk about soft power. I mean, I don't know why this is in the interest of American taxpayers is beyond me.
And we also see that Elon Musk is sending out more emails, and these emails are making people feel very uncomfortable. It's, 5 things you did last week. It's a major accomplishment. I mean, the next thing you're going to have agencies doing regular check-ins with their employees, and that is just such an oppressive environment. I don't know how anybody could work under those conditions.
Well, as Musk has said, the threshold thing they're trying to find out is whether these employees exist. Inability to respond to an email might suggest that they're dead. I mean, it's unbelievable. Dan, as you may know, I spent most of my life as a lawyer, which means that for decades I kept track of my time and what I was doing and how I was serving my clients in 6-minute increments all through the day. And so the idea that you should have to come up with a list of 5 things you've done in the last week, hardly an outrage.
Well, now Department of Defense Pete Hegseth, he's the secretary there. He's telling his employees this, I think it was yesterday or Saturday over the weekend sometime, he said, no, you do have to fill out that email.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Initially there was some back and forth. I know Tulsi Gabbard too told her people, "Time out. You don't have to do that." And frankly, I'm not sure why. I believe Trump has stood by Elon Musk on this. In any event, I hope that they do at least have to report in periodically.
Well, they're cracking up over this. I mean, you had first AOC say that Musk is the dumbest billionaire that she's ever met, and now, but the deepest cut of all, you're one of the members of your congressional delegation, the renowned intellect Representative Ilhan Omar, had this to say.
The retirement thing for air traffic controllers is also, again, it just shows how much he doesn't know. I know people talk about him as a genius, but to me, I think he's probably one of the dumbest, luckiest people to exist on this earth.
What do you say there, John?
Yeah, well, of course, Ilhan has great experience at, catching rockets after they've re-entered the atmosphere. And I mean, of course, what's she talking about? Retirement of air traffic controllers? There hasn't been a retirement of air traffic controllers.
Yeah, I guess that to the extent that some FAA personnel may have taken the 8-month early buyout. somehow that necessarily is the nexus for anything that goes wrong on in any airport anywhere. I mean, that's this is obviously what they try to do, right? I mean,
yeah, in Canada particularly.
Yes, exactly. When a plane flips in Toronto, that's the result of those early retirements. Related story: I saw Tim Walz ranting and raving, much like our very own Governor J.B. Pritzker, about these Nazis that have descended on Minneapolis. Have they been rounded up yet?
Well, it's a little unclear who exactly he was talking about. He was recorded talking to a nurses union group, and the nurses unions, are very radical, and saying, well, people are asking, what's wrong with the Democratic Party? Well, there's nothing wrong with the Democratic Party, he said. The problem is that our country has been stolen by Nazis and fascists. Mm-hmm. And so this was made public on our website, Powerline, as well as other places. And a reporter actually had the temerity to ask Tim Walz about this, which is unusual for the somnolent preparatory class here in Minnesota. And he said, well, I wasn't talking about all Republicans. I was talking about the ones who, by their own admission, by their own admission, are Nazis and fascists. Well, presumably that's a pretty short list.
Yeah, I'm not sure of any sort of card-carrying Republican office holder who identifies with the National Socialist Party, but that's your governor, future presidential candidate, just like our governor here. Do you have a functioning legislative branch of government now, or what's the status on the revolution happening in Minneapolis?
Well, it's kind of a long story, Dan, but very briefly, the Minnesota House of Representatives is now controlled by one vote by the Republicans, and it's a real breath of fresh air. Republican leadership in that chamber is very strong. And one consequence of that, by the way, is that my staffers at Center of the American Experiment are over there in St. Paul testifying just about every day in front of various committees. And so it's great. The Democrats think they're going to win a special election later this month, and they may, and if they do, then it will be tied in the Minnesota House. But the agreement under which they belatedly came back to work, they were drawing pay but not showing up at the legislature, and we pounded away at them, and they finally knuckled under and came back to work. And so we're going to have a Republican speaker in the Minnesota House for the next 2 years. And in the Senate, the Democrats are clinging to a one-vote margin, which they have by virtue of the fact that one of their members' criminal trial for first-degree burglary got postponed so that she could continue to vote until the end of the session. I'm not making this up.
What'd she steal? That is
allegedly.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Well, allegedly, the cops in a small town in northern Minnesota, she drove like 4 hours to get there, caught her crawling out of a basement window in her stepmother's house with her stepmother's laptop in her hand, wearing a black cat suit and with a flashlight with black cloth over it. She was like the cat burglar.
This is awesome.
I don't know.
Meow, meow.
It's unbelievable.
I wonder what's on the laptop, huh?
No, I don't know.
Maybe something.
I don't know. That's
various.
That sounds like she may have been entrapped. I think.
Yeah, well, her stepmother woke up and got out of bed and tripped over her. She was lying on the floor next to her stepmother's bed, and she then got up and ran. She had broken in the basement window, and she got up and ran, and the stepmother thought it was a man. She didn't know, and she called 911, and the 911 dispatcher, she said, there's a burglar in my house. The 911 dispatcher says, run and get a butcher knife. Right? This is rural Minnesota, by the way. They don't fool around.
Yeah.
And so she did. She stayed there with a butcher knife, waiting to find out what's going on. And then the dispatcher calls the police, and they arrive in time to catch the senator climbing out of her stepmother's basement.
Now, is that state senator the favorite for the Senate seat, retiring Tina Smith? If she
she's
be running?
Almost the only Democrat that hasn't announced for it.
So what about Tim Walz? I mean, just because he's such a national figure now, Does he face any trouble getting reelected next year?
Well, he served 2 terms. He's been reelected once. We don't have term limits in Minnesota, so I take it. I'm not a Tim Wells insider. I'll say that, but I take it that he is deliberating whether he wants to run for a 3rd term or jump into the race for that Senate seat, along with, by the way, his lieutenant governor, who's already announced for the Senate seat. Apparently, they hate each other.
Wonderful.
Well,
Boy, this is.
Yeah, he's got lots.
I'm going to start following Minnesota politics a little bit more closely because it sounds like it's a lot of fun, actually, these days. John Hinderaker, president of the Center of the American Experiment, contributor to Powerline, powerlineblog.com. Thanks, John.
Great to be with you, Dan. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
That shot was money, Lisa. Hey, speaking of, did you ever figure out what to do with your parents' old coin collection?
Not yet. I need a reputable dealer to appraise them. I have no clue what they're worth.
I just finished working on my dad's estate collections. I took it all to Fox Valley Coins. Their customer service was